Okay, so welcome to Adobe Premiere. This is the video editing software we use. It's a professional level, but actually you can get a pretty good hold of the basics if you know anything about Windows Movie Maker or iMovie or things like that, because the principles are fairly straightforward and similar. So when you first open Adobe Premiere, what you have is this welcome screen. There's some recent projects that you might have done which you might want to click on, but for our purposes we're either going to open a project or we're going to create a new project. So let's do that. You then get this preset screen which you have to get right. It's very important that if something goes wrong at this stage, then I'm afraid you're not going to be able to rescue it. Basically, DVPAL up here is the main choice because that's what we use in Europe, and you've then got four choices. You always want to choose 48 kilohertz, and then your final option is whether or not you started by shooting in widescreen. If you did, then you use widescreen there. If you didn't, then you use standard, and that's completely up to you. The next bit you have to get right is where you save it. Now I'm going to save mine in a particular folder here, which is where I use all of my Adobe documents. However, for you guys, you're going to have to save it to your area. That's the media, your media area, should we say. You just click on the folder, make sure it's right, and then you name your project. So test is mine. I'm going to OK that. And that's it. That's your document set up. If you've done it right, you won't need to come back to that again. So a little look at the workspace before you start, because the more familiar you are with this, the better. This is completely controllable. These tabs up here can be shifted, they can be moved anywhere you like. And actually I tend to have mine a little bit like this. With the effects over here and effects control, I like them to be next to each other. We've got, well, let's run through this systematically. All of your project controls are controlled under File. So here you can open a new project, open a project you've done before, you can save, etc., etc. Where you import materials is into this. It's called the bin. Alright? It's taken from the old Hollywood days where you had to keep cans of film in a bin because they were flammable. But if you do File Import, then everything you import will go into this particular bin. So let's give you an example here. I'm going to give you a sample video, and you can see it imports it into my bin. Other areas of interest, well, this is the main one. This is the timeline here. What you'll see is basically everything that you're doing goes on in the timeline. So I drag this down into the timeline. You'll notice it's dragged down twice. One is on the video line and one is on the audio line. On the bottom one I can control all the sounds. On the top one I can control all the video effects. I can scrub through just by dragging this, or alternatively this is my monitor window where I can press play and see whatever I've got. I can stop it, I can scroll it forward by single frames at a time, or backwards by single frames at a time. All of those things are possible in that main monitor window. Another area you've got here is on the left hand side. These are your main tools. You actually use very few of them. This is the selection tool, which just selects things and helps you move them around. The only other one I tend to use is this razor tool. Okay, it's C for shortcut, and if you press that and go over the red line tells you exactly where you are in the clip. So you can see it's moved on there. Now I have to be over the clip itself and over the red line, but if I press the button now, you'll see I've split it into two, and from there it's fairly easy to get rid of that or just reposition it. Remember, if you ever make a mistake, Control Z is your friend. It's the button you go to undo. So what else do we have? Well, up here we have the effects window and the effects control window. Now these are two of the most important things, because what we want to do is to be able to do things to these clips once we've chopped them up. You have audio effects, you have audio transitions. Now an effect is something that you apply onto the video, and a transition is something that goes between the video. So for instance, if we put these two clips next to each other, you can see that with video transitions I've got a whole host of things like 3D motion, dissolves, GPU transitions, iris transitions, etc., etc. Very rarely will you use any of these if you were doing a proper professional documentary or a film. You would tend to use the dissolves. For instance, you might use a cross dissolve, and you just put it between the two. And if you have a look at what happens here, it does a little cross dissolve between the two things. You can also do a dip to black. Again, I can put that on the end. So here's my dip to black. And you can do dips to white and all sorts of things like that. So these, the dissolves, are the most common ones. However, you might, if you're really going to overdo things, you might want to put some of these ones in. 3D motion, for instance, gives us a cube spin. Again, we put that in between the two, and what happens is we get this cube spin effect if you look up at the transition window. It's running a little slow today. Personally, I don't like them, but that's me. So there's your video transitions. The next things you can do are video effects. Now here you have a whole host of different options which we'll go into at a later date. Again, all put onto the video by simply selecting and dragging over the video. Now there are two types of video effect. The first one is just a straight effect that you put on. But the second one is something which is much more common, which you have to control. So for instance, let's put a lens flare on here. You can see my lens flare is there. However, that gives me no control. And to control your effects, you go to Effect Control, oddly enough. Here we go, there's my lens flare. These are the things that I can control with it. I can control where the center of the flare is, so I can shift that around. My alternative to doing that is just to select it here like that. So I might want it coming off that horse's forehead. I can look at the flare brightness, up and down there. I can look at different types of lenses. For instance, this is a 50 to 300. This is a prime, and you see they're very slightly different effect on all of them. And you can look at blending as well. So this is how you are basically applying the effect. Remember that it is applied to the whole clip, so you might not want to do that. If you want to see what it looked like before you put it on, you simply toggle the effect off, back on, so you can see what the difference is. So those are our basic different areas. We've got the bin here, we've got the timeline here, the tools on the left, and we've got the effects over here, the effects control panel, and we've got the main monitor for the timeline. This, by the way, is a source monitor. If you just want to see what's going on here, you just double click the file that's in the bin and you can see it before you even put it on the timeline. And that's the introduction to the workspace.